very big news on the labor market front. Amazon workers in New York have just voted to form Amazon's first U.S. union. And it's important because this really breaks a way of doing business that we've seen in large tech companies over the last couple decades, in that they typically haven't been pro-union. A lot of them will say that they're not anti-union, but if you track their actions, typically they'll do things that block formations of unions. And so this news for Amazon comes off the back of a wave of pushes towards unionization. We've seen Starbucks stores in the last few months also have faced pressures, at least from employees to start unions, and we're seeing a little bit of the friction there. But a little bit of the details behind this deal here. So Amazon's JFK 8 facility, which is its largest on Staten Island, voted 2,654 to 2,131 in favor of organizing. And there are about 8,300 voters at that location. So that brings up an interesting thought. And where did the other 4,000 individuals go, and why did they not choose to vote either one way or another? But this is interesting, and it brings up a thought on my side, which is, are we seeing what is really just kind of the natural life cycle of an organization? When you think of startups and you think of what we've traditionally viewed as these kind of high-flying tech companies, when you're small and you need to make quick decisions and you're trying to scale and grow as fast as you can, there's this natural inclination to be a little bit less inclined to want to allow unions, because unions create structures and infrastructures and dynamics that are harder for organizations to navigate. Decision making takes a little bit longer, for example. But the unions will argue that on the other side of that equation, that workers then have their rights a little bit more protected, and there's a little bit more pricing power because you form this big block of individuals. What does this mean for Amazon as an employer going forward? Do people that work in that region become more attracted or less attracted to Amazon as an employer as a function of this move? It's going to be interesting to see over the next few years, to kind of watch what Amazon does also in response to this. Do they move away from this facility as a hub in the space? There's a lot of dynamics here that are interesting. There's another clip that's going through my mind. I think it's a John Oliver episode of his show where they talk about working conditions at Amazon, and there's a clip in there where they have a little infographic as part of their training. This is probably a few years old, but there's an infographic or a little cartoon that says we're not we're not anti-union, but we're also not pro-union, and it goes on to this thing, and that's what's going through my mind right now as I see this headline come over the wire, so to speak. Going back to the point, though, the idea of the natural progression of an organization. When you're young and you're fresh and you're trying to scale, there's less of a pressure to unionize. People are a little bit more, I wouldn't say competitive, but there's a little bit more of a kind of a hunger or just a startup mentality around scaling a company. And as companies get a little bit more old or they get a little bit more mature, you start to see different kinds of workers come to the company. I think that's a natural progression in an organization. And so are we seeing with Amazon, with Starbucks, with the Walmarts of the world, just this natural progression to where those are becoming older companies? In the press, in the media, they're still media darlings, in that we always think of them as kind of the brightest blue flame companies on the market right now. But are they moving into the phase that, when we look at the traditional auto manufacturers out in Detroit, where they've been, for the last few decades, and is the Amazons, is the Starbucks starting to move into that place to where they're now the mature companies that have to deal with mature issues, like pushes for unionization and stuff, and we're going to start to see a new wave of companies that are the disruptors, that are the more startup mentality, and that's just a kind of an interesting dynamic that might be happening here. When I think of unions as well, companies' decision making and that kind of stuff changes because there's almost like this extra level of, I wouldn't call it bureaucracy, but it's almost that, to where things typically slow down And so, what does that mean for Amazon in this region of the country, of the world, in terms of how they're going to be able to make decisions? So, very interesting story. I think it's significant in that it's it's happening in New York, which is one of the largest economies in the world, regardless of whether you're a country or a city. I mean, that's a massive economy in and of itself. And so with the second largest employer in the US, Amazon, facing these pressures, and then also now having its first union as part of its workforce, what does this mean for the greater workforce, the greater economy for the US? So interesting to pay attention to. If you've got any thoughts on the unionization, please feel free to leave a comment below, and then subscribe if you enjoy these kind of conversations where we talk about jobs and economics and HR and marketing, because we'd love to have you on board.